Social media, good or bad? Or more specifically, I think Alex was asking, growing up with social media, good or bad? Are we better off than our parents' generation or worse? Alex made the point where he pointed out that it really kind of enabled him to interact with people and find like-minded individuals with whom he could be friends, which is great. And I think, and he made the point that it felt like it would be particularly challenging to try and achieve that without the internet. And I think a lot of people would agree in that it is kind of inconceivable now to go, well, how do you even, how do you meet anybody? Because there's no internet. There's a lot of things that we look at, you know, how would you date? You can't even Google the person, make sure they're not a serial killer. I think there are a lot of things that we kind of take for granted as far as just, you know, and it's to the point where it really just seems ridiculous that our parents' generation weren't all murdered by amorous serial killers. I want to make a point, though, with regard to that experience, because I think we make a mistake when we try and compare these things directly. There's some rule that was made, I think, initially about fax machines, which, for those of you who don't know, was a device that you would hook up to your phone, and not your phone, but your, like, phone. People would have a second line for this stuff. And you would scan a piece of paper in it, and it would send stuff over the wire, and then someone else's fax machine would print it out. And there was some guy who made the comment that the value of a fax machine increases exponentially with the number of people that own fax machines. That one person owning a fax machine is kind of pointless, but if everybody owns a fax machine, great. And that's one of the reasons why it's so challenging for new social media sites to take off. Google Plus has a lot of problems, but they also entered the market when everybody was on something else. So even if Google Plus had been this amazing, fantastic new service, the sheer fact that you go ahead and join it, and if it's amazing, wonderful, but none of your friends are on it. So the value is so much less. And that's one of the reasons that we don't see people coming in and be like, well, we're all hopping off of Facebook to do a new thing, because there's this sort of locking, because Facebook has tremendous value based on the number of other people that you know who are using it. And I think this is, we can kind of apply the same principle to other things. I remember when I was in high school, I really wanted a cell phone. Not like a super cool cell phone, but like one of those crappy cell phones. And I would argue with my parents and my dad, and I said, why? What if I'm in an emergency? I need to get a hold of you guys. And my dad said, well, just ask one of your friends to borrow their cell phone. If you think about it, isn't a solution that really scales very well. I mean, if everybody kind of adopts that pattern. But I want to sort of apply that to kind of friendships. And if we think about when we think now that it'd be so difficult to make friends outside of the internet because you can't find like-minded folks, we look back at our parents' generation. I think when you have to keep in mind that nobody had the internet. There's a difference between you are the only person who doesn't have access to this thing and everybody else does. Then you're shut out, and then I think that's sort of more akin to what we actually imagine. But in reality, nobody had internet access, and so people were much more likely to develop friendships even if they didn't necessarily like the same things, just kind of based on proximity. I think as a result, we may have been kind of more tolerant of differing opinions. One of the things, there's a great book called The Filter Bubble that talks about some of the problems with social media and search engines and the way that we're trying to optimize the web to show us the content that we want to see. That it becomes very difficult for us to get differing points of view. And I think that when we were kind of forced to interact with people based on geographical proximity, that may have been a better way to ensure that we don't just go, I'm going to like all of the people, I'm going to be friends with all of the people who like Firefly, regardless of where they live, because then you may never have encountered someone who doesn't like Firefly. This isn't a good argument. Firefly's perfect. But, I don't know, maybe you have a political view. It becomes challenging to hear hear kind of diverse opinions within the context of social media, because we are kind of self-selecting the friends with whom we've already decided we have things in common. So now there are other sides to this. I mean, obviously, even just looking at geographical proximity, there are going to be a lot of issues with regard to race and class. People tended to congregate, so if you were in an affluent, rich white neighborhood, you were likely going to have rich white friends because they were the people that were nearby. The internet does technically provide the ability to get around that, but even so, I'm not convinced that it necessarily that it necessarily does. It certainly seems like there's still a lot of kind of class and race stratification. Even on the presumably neutral internet, and I think part of that is really just kind of that filter bubble thing. So I guess the question that I think this comes down to is whether or not we think that it is better to be able to self-select friends, because I think the environment was so different back then that it's really not a matter of it would have been impossible for any of us to make friends, because everyone else would have felt the same way. Nobody had the internet. Everyone had to learn to kind of get along with the people that were nearby. But I think the question now is it the sort of thing where we want to be able to pick people who are to be our friends who are like-minded? Do we want to be able to reach out to people with whom we have things in common? Or is there some value in being challenged to develop relationships with people whose opinions may differ wildly, where the only thing that we necessarily have in common is proximity? And I think both are great. I've certainly had experiences where I have made friends with people simply because we were in the same place at the same time, and I'm still good friends with them. I have friends that I've met because we have very similar interests, so we met on the internet. I do worry that an overdependence on social media does tend to push us toward that filter bubble thing, and it makes it more difficult for us to interact. We don't get the practice of interacting with people who we haven't pre-selected to be our friends, and I worry that that's kind of one of the reasons that we see kind of the decline of villages, and we see everybody kind of on their phones and unwilling to make conversation. A lot of the kind of fear of strangers and that sort of thing. So those are my thoughts. I don't know that I've answered the question. I don't know that I can say yes or no, but I think we have to clarify that the assumption of that it being a technological improvement is not necessarily correct, because we have to keep in mind that everybody is operating in the same sort of technical environment. So I have not answered the question. I have just fleshed out the question a little bit. I'm interested in hearing what other people think. I'll see you guys next week.